Betsy Ross, the dark truth behind the first American flag. For generations, schoolbooks have praised her as the brave seamstress who stitched the very soul of America, its first flag. With delicate hands and a patriotic heart, Betsy Ross allegedly sat in a quiet Philadelphia workshop and brought George Washington's vision to life. But what if that tale, sewn so neatly into the fabric of American identity, isn't entirely true? What if the story we know was carefully embroidered decades later, by those with everything to gain? Before we unfold the truth, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and let us know in the comments what other legendary figures you'd like us to investigate. These stories deserve to be told, not as myths, but as the tangled threads of real history. Because behind the red, white, and blue lies a mystery layered in memory, politics, and silence. And when we pull on one thread, the whole legend begins to unravel. What really happened in that sewing room? Was there even a meeting with George Washington? And who decided that Betsy Ross would be remembered as the mother of the flag? Let's start with the story's strongest and slowly reveal its weakest seams. The tale begins in the summer of 1776. America is on the brink of independence, and tensions boil in Philadelphia. A group of revolutionary leaders, including George Washington, is said to have visited the humble upholstery shop of a widow named Betsy Ross. There, in a quiet candlelit room, Washington supposedly unveiled a sketch of a flag. 13 stripes, 13 stars in a circle. Betsy, according to legend, suggested changing the stars from 6 points to 5 for ease of stitching, and with that small act, shaped the face of a nation. The image is iconic. The founding fathers standing in reverence and a modest woman sewing history. This version of events has been printed in textbooks, illustrated in paintings, and dramatized in films. The story carries an irresistible charm. A woman, otherwise overlooked in history, becomes a central figure in the birth of the Republic. She isn't just a seamstress. She's a symbol of patriotic spirit and quiet strength. School children cut paper stars and reenact her scene in classrooms every July. It's a rare moment in American folklore where a woman takes center stage without controversy, a heroine of thread and needle, neatly woven into national memory. Yet even in its simplicity, the story raises questions. There are no official records from the Continental Congress confirming the flag's commission. No letters from Washington mention Betsy Ross by name. In fact, the first public account of the tale didn't appear until nearly a century later, in 1870, told by her grandson, William Canby. His speech to the Historical Society of Pennsylvania was compelling, heartfelt, and full of family lore, but lacked one crucial thing: evidence. Still, the story caught on, arriving at a moment when the United States desperately needed unifying myths after the trauma of the Civil War. The timing was perfect. A country fractured by blood and ideology now clung to symbols that could remind its citizens of shared origins. Betsy Ross, the gentle patriot with a needle, was an ideal figure. She wasn't political. She wasn't divisive. She represented tradition, femininity, and sacrifice, values that transcended party lines. Her tale became a soft thread stitched into the harsher narrative of revolution and violence. As the centennial of 1776 approached, her image was polished and promoted, appearing in murals, exhibitions, and even commemorative stamps. The myth became a monument, and few questioned the bricks beneath it. But behind the sweetness of the story lies an unsettling truth. The more you look for facts, the more the seams begin to fray. If Betsy truly crafted the first flag, why was her contribution not recognized for nearly 100 years? Why was her story absent from the writings of her own contemporaries? As we move forward, we'll explore not just what the legend claims, but why it came to be in the first place. Because sometimes the most enduring symbols are built not from truth, but from the desperate need to believe in something. The year was 1870, nearly 100 years after American independence, when a man named William Canby stood before the Historical Society of Pennsylvania and told a story that would change how the nation viewed its first flag. He claimed that his grandmother, Betsy Ross, had sewn the original stars and stripes after a visit from George Washington himself. His tone was sincere, his details vivid, but historians in the room were quietly skeptical. There were no letters, no diary entries, no government records to confirm the event. What Canby offered was oral history, a tale passed through generations. But it came at a curious time. America, still reeling from the Civil War, was hungry for unity. In the aftermath of war, the country didn't just need heroes. It needed narratives that soothed, simplified, and inspired. Betsy's story did all three. The image of a woman, nonpartisan and humble, crafting the nation's flag with her own hands, was healing. It gave the North and South a symbol to rally around, one that had no blood on it, only thread. Canby's story was picked up by newspapers, art commissions, and eventually school curricula. It spread quickly, embraced not for its historical accuracy, but for its emotional power, a comforting fable in a nation desperate to believe in beginnings untainted by conflict. But Canby was not alone in shaping the myth. His sister Rachel and other family members actively supported and embellished the story, adding details that reinforced Betsy's role. They submitted affidavits from relatives, created genealogical charts, and even proposed historical plaques. These efforts weren't just about honoring a grandmother. They were about cementing a legacy in the fabric of American memory, and they were remarkably successful. In 1876, the centennial celebration of U.S. independence officially embraced Betsy Ross as the flag's creator. Her home became a tourist destination. Paintings romanticized the supposed flag presentation scene, often depicting Washington and Ross in soft candlelight, a tableau of destiny. Yet here lies the twist. Prior to 1870, Betsy Ross had been virtually absent from the story of the American flag. Other figures, like Francis Hopkinson, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, had stronger claims. Hopkinson even submitted invoices to Congress for designing a national flag. But his story lacked the emotional punch, the familial warmth. He was a politician, not a seamstress, a bureaucrat, not a folk hero. And in a post-war America trying to rebuild trust in institutions, Betsy's humble persona resonated more than any man's paper trail. It was narrative over documentation, feeling over fact. As we dig deeper, a question begins to rise. Was Betsy's story embraced because it was true, or because it was useful? In shaping national identity, the line between history and myth often blurs. And sometimes, the most enduring heroes are those who tell us what we want to hear. The flag became a vessel for that longing, and Betsy Ross became its face. But if she wasn't the original designer, who was, and what happened to the other contenders for that legacy? When historians finally turned to primary sources to uncover the origins of the American flag, Betsy Ross's name was nowhere to be found. There are no congressional records, no wartime correspondence, no journal entries confirming a meeting between Ross and Washington. In fact, the only official documentation tied to early flag designs comes from Francis Hopkinson, a Philadelphia lawyer, musician, and signer of the Declaration of Independence. Hopkinson submitted bills to Congress requesting payment for designing the flag of the United States, though Congress ultimately refused, citing that he was already on parole. The paper trail is undeniable. It places him at the center of the flag's creation long before Ross's name even entered public consciousness. But even Hopkinson's claim isn't the neat answer we crave. His design differed in subtle but important ways. His stars were six-pointed, not five. His flag likely served naval or military use, and variations were common. It appears that no single first flag existed, but rather a series of evolving designs, many stitched by anonymous women working in homes and workshops across the colonies. In this version of history, Betsy becomes symbolic of many, not unique, but representative, a face chosen from a crowd. And yet, the public preferred a singular creator. One name, one moment, one flag. It made for a cleaner myth. This desire for simplicity may explain why so many other flag makers were forgotten. Rebecca Young, for example, made flags for the Continental Army. Her daughter, Mary Pickersgill, would later craft the famous Star-Spangled Banner flown at Fort McHenry. Other seamstresses worked anonymously, their hands lost to time. The archive silence on Betsy Ross might not be proof of absence, but it's certainly not confirmation of presence. Still, by the time scholars voiced their doubts in the 20th century, the image of Betsy had already become too iconic to challenge without backlash. Museums featured her, politicians quoted her, schools taught her, One particularly chilling irony emerges from these records. The first flag story we believe in may have been born from political invention rather than historical fact. A comforting tale created not during the Revolution, but in a period of national healing, where emotional truth was allowed to overshadow archival silence. And this was unique to Betsy. America has long shaped history through selective memory, elevating figures who serve the nation's emotional needs over those grounded in fact. The story of the flag, like the flag itself, became a tool to unify, to inspire, and to conceal. But if the truth is scattered across documents and forgotten names, how did Betsy Ross rise above them all? What turned her into the mythic mother of a symbol that never officially bore her name? In the next chapter, we explore how symbols, even stitched from fiction, can carry profound emotional truths, and how silence, repetition, and nostalgia can be more powerful than any documented fact. In the absence of concrete facts, symbols rise. And Betsy Ross, whether or not she ever met Washington, became more than a woman. She became a symbol, a quiet widow in a time of war, sewing in candlelight while the nation was born outside her window. It's an image that soothes the discomfort of revolution's brutality. In truth, the war for independence was bloody, divisive, and uncertain. But through Betsy's myth, Americans could imagine the birth of the nation as something gentle, domestic, and virtuous. A flag, after all, is more than cloth. It is memory stitched into color, and silence, carefully maintained, can speak louder than any document. The story also reveals something deeper about how nations shape identity. By elevating Betsy Ross, America didn't just honor one woman. It erased many others. The myth flattens history into a single image, one flag, one maker, one moment. And yet, the real story is messier. Multiple designs, multiple hands, multiple motives, the silence surrounding other flag makers, the women who weren't named, the men who were mythologized, speaks volumes about who gets remembered and why. Memory isn't neutral, it's curated. And in that curation, the nation chose comfort over complexity, certainty over contradiction. Psychologically, Betsy Ross represents the archetype of the nurturing mother, the woman who births identity through creation. In a country that still struggled to define itself post-Civil War, her image offered emotional repair. She was neither threatening nor political. Unlike male founders associated with war, compromise, and slavery, Betsy stood for something cleaner. Her needle replaced the sword. Her silence replaced the violence. But that very silence is revealing. By not questioning the lack of evidence, by repeating the story without scrutiny, America participated in a kind of collective forgetting, a rewriting born from need, not truth. The five-pointed star she supposedly insisted on carries its own metaphor. It is the same shape placed on the shoulders of generals, on the sides of tanks, and on graves. The star became a tool of power, one stitched by a woman whose historical role remains unproven. There's poetry in that. The myth of Betsy Ross is not empty. It's full of what Americans needed to believe. A female figure of origin who never raised her voice, never asked for credit, and yet shaped the symbol we salute. Whether that's empowering or tragic depends on how much we're willing to interrogate the narrative. So, if the flag was not born from one pair of hands, but from a collage of effort, erasure, and symbolism, what does that say about us? What does it reveal about the stories we protect, the lives we preserve, and the heroes we choose? In the final part, we'll return to the flag not as an object of certainty, but as a mirror, one that reflects both our pride and our blind spots. The American flag is perhaps the most recognizable symbol in the world. It waves on battlefields and porches, on classroom walls and international stages. And for millions, it represents freedom, sacrifice, and unity. But its origin, messy, uncertain, and debated, reminds us that even the strongest symbols are stitched from contradiction. The story of Betsy Ross teaches us that myths aren't born by accident. They are chosen. They emerge in moments of need, when nations long for clarity in times of chaos. In that way, the flag is not just history. It's hope materialized, even if the story behind it was tailored more by memory than fact. By embracing Betsy Ross, America didn't just honor a single woman. It crafted a narrative of gentleness in a violent era, unity in a divided past. She became a bridge between male revolution and feminine virtue, fact and fiction, silence and symbolism. And in doing so, she became timeless. The tragedy isn't that she may not have sewn the first flag. The tragedy is that, once chosen, her story left no room for others. The nameless seamstresses, the forgotten designers, the competing versions, all buried beneath the clean lines of red, white, and blue. Still, perhaps there's power in that silence too, because a flag has never been just about the past. It's about the meaning we assign to it in the present. Today, when we salute it, we don't do so for one woman in a workshop or one meeting that may never have happened. We do so for the ideal stitched into it: justice, identity, collective struggle. And in that sense, maybe Betsy's story is true, not in document, but in desire. We needed her to be real. And so, in the space between history and belief, she became real. But knowing the truth behind the tale doesn't weaken the symbol. It strengthens it, because understanding the human hand behind history, flawed, political, strategic, allows us to approach the present with greater clarity. If we can question our myths without discarding their meaning, we grow. We see that symbols endure not despite complexity, but because of it. And if Betsy Ross didn't make the flag, she still helped make the meaning. The story is less about stitches and more about the stories we choose to pass on. So next time you see the flag, look closely. Think not just of stars and stripes, but of silence and selection. Think of the women whose hands went unnamed. Think of the myths that shaped us and the truths waiting to be uncovered. And if this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, hit like, and let us know in the comments what tale we should unravel next. Become a member today to help us keep exposing the forgotten corners of history. More revelations like this are coming. You won't believe what's hidden in the next legend.